Welcome to Session 2. This is microbiologist and holistic health advocate Michelle Moore, and I want to talk now about 5 probiotic myths and mistakes. These are common myths that reduce your probiotic benefits. Alright, the top 5 probiotic myths include, first of all, that you don't need probiotics. Second, if you've tried one, you've tried them all. I know that probably rings true for a lot of folks, as a lot of times people don't notice any positive benefits with using probiotics. Thirdly, that yogurt and sauerkraut are good probiotic choices. Fourth, that the higher the CFU, which is colony forming units, is a standard measurement for bacteria, that the higher the CFU or potency, the better the probiotic is. And lastly, that doctor-prescribed probiotics are the best. Well, let's discuss a little bit about probiotics specifically. Now, in Session 1, I discussed the microbiome and how it's really akin to a rainforest that's comprised of about 1,000 different species of bacteria and yeast and viruses, all working and living and talking with each other in a complex ecosystem. Now, most of these species of the microbiome are beneficial or harmless. Now, the word probiotic is for life, pro meaning for, biotic is life. Therefore, antibiotic means against life. And probiotics are what we consider good microbes, good bacteria that we supplement with. And usually they're in capsule form. And you can also get probiotics through traditional fermented live foods like live fermented sauerkraut or kimchi or kefir. Probiotics can be composed of a single strain of bacteria like a Lactobacillus acidophilus probiotic, or it can contain a bunch of different strains of bacteria. There's also types of friendly yeast that can be considered probiotics. And there's newer probiotics on the market now that include soil-based organisms, or SBOs, and those would be organisms, just like it says, found in the soil. And there's also spore formers. Myth number 1, you do not need probiotics. Well, as I mentioned in Session 1, your very life depends upon your microbiome. Without it, you're not making a lot of the vitamins and enzymes and breaking down food through proteases and whatnot. It has very critical functions to your life. It also coaches your immune system on what's good and bad, whether it's your own human cells or whether it's good versus bad bacteria. So the microbiome is critical. And I'm sure you've probably taken antibiotics like most people have. And when you do so, you not only lose the bad bacteria, but you also lose the good bacteria. And actually, just with one round of antibiotics, you can lose 80 to 90% of all the bacteria in your microbiome. It does grow back pretty quickly, but what changes is the diversity is reduced. And diversity in that rainforest ecosystem of your microbiome is really what creates resistance to invasions or infections. And GI infections like C. difficile that grows in an environment that has a low diversity, a low diverse population of bacteria and yeast and fungi and viruses. So restoring your balance, again, is important. And as I mentioned last time too, there's some debate on how long it can take to restore that diversity and that balance in your microbiome depending on who you listen to. So again, what we can do to restore that balance is going to be helpful for our long-term health. And in the last session too, I talked about the different stressors to your microbiome, whether it's chlorinated water or antibiotics in your food, stress and lack of sleep, that all affects your microbiome. And, when people lived closer to the garden, they're out gardening and getting dirty, working out in the fields, eating off the land. They had a lot more exposure to these probiotic cultures that are out there in the soil. And that's different than today's world, where it's pretty sterile when we're living in homes and we're using bleach to clean up everything, and we're eating dead, processed, chemical-laden foods that have toxins and antibiotics and sugar that feed potentially pathogenic bacteria. So we're living a different lifestyle than we used to, and that affects the microbiome. And those stressors create a loss of your good, healthy lactic acid type bacteria, which is one of which is your lactobacillus type bacteria. And one of their functions is to produce lactic acid, and that acidifies the colon, which is where the majority of the gut microbiome is. And that more acidic environment favors the growth of healthy bacteria. When you have antibiotics or stressors that lower that diversity and shift the balance to more pathogenic strains, the pH in the gut, instead of being more acidic, gets more alkaline. And when it's more alkaline, that enables certain strains to become pathogenic. All right, researchers also have discovered that the diversity and numbers of organisms that are in your microbiome actually change throughout your life. Where you may have more when you're younger, you might have less when you're older, or you might have less when you're younger and they become more when you get older. An example being your bifidobacterium, and these are protective, good species of bacterium. Well, they start declining after you reach the age of 50. Whereas on the other hand, Clostridium, some of which can be pathogenic, will start increasing after the age of 50. Some types of flora of your microbiome also are transient, so replacing them every so often can also help maintain the balance of your microbiome. And as I mentioned before, an unhealthy biome is tied to numerous diseases, so replenishing your good probiotic species, good species of your microbiome, will increase your lactic acid production. These good probiotic species you can bring in can also police and control bad bacteria and help you regain your health. And so all these different factors combined that we just discussed here in myth number 1 elaborate why you do need probiotics. Myth number 2, if you've tried one probiotic, you've tried them all. Well, have you ever tried probiotics and didn't notice any positive changes? Well, if so, there's a few reasons for that. You might be surprised to hear that not all probiotic strains were chosen for their ability to survive passage through the human gut. And a lot of the strains have been around for some time, and they were created before we had the view that we do now of the microbiome. Basically, lactobacillus and bifidobacteria strains originally came from the dairy industry. They used these strains for many years, as they still do, to create cheese and yogurt products that required some fermentation. And those strains of bacteria were actually isolated from cows. They were really easy to grow, and they eventually got the idea of creating a probiotic supplement back in the 1960s. So they were really chosen not for their potency in the human gut or their ability to survive a hostile human stomach. So there's some disadvantages to these strains. Secondly, what's on the label may not really be what you're taking. There was a study from the University of California that tested 16 different products, and they only found 1 out of 16 of these products contained the bifidobacteria species that was actually listed on the label. All right, well, even we have found that various lactobacillus and bifidobacteria species probiotics have been helpful for some people, but not actually for the majority of people. And this has been something we've also seen with health professionals. They've had the same issues, whether it's for commercial or professional brand products. So it's not just about professional level products when it comes to the effectiveness of probiotics. And I think what's likely going on with this variability in results is, again, it goes back to your native microbiome. And not everybody will have the same common lactobacillus species or bifidobacteria strains in their unique microbiome. So remember, again, it's like your unique fingerprint. So if you add a probiotic that doesn't normally belong there, it's going to actually have a hard time getting a foothold in your microbiome. And because your microbiome and your immune system grow up together, your immune system actually will recognize your native microbiome as yourself. And if it's not part of yourself, then it's something that can be targeted by your immune system. So, in summary, if you've had variable results with probiotics, there's actually a lot of different reasons why that can be. Did it survive the passage through your stomach? Because not all probiotics were designed to make it through your stomach. Is it a strain that's actually native to you specifically? There's labeling issues with probiotics, so what you thought you took may not really be what you took as far as that specific strain or strains of probiotics. And perhaps it lost potency and didn't arrive in your intestines in high enough numbers to actually make a significant impact. So there's a lot of variables here and many reasons why probiotics may not have worked for you. So yogurt and sauerkraut, are these good probiotics? Well, in the first part here, yogurt, often if you're getting commercial yogurt products, they're going to be full of sugar. And unfortunately, sugar is not something you're going to want to eat, especially if you're dealing with an infection or a GI overgrowth, because that sugar is going to help grow pathogenic or potentially disease-causing bacteria in your microbiome, in your gut. And so that's something we always advise people to minimize, whether it's sugar or the highly processed carbohydrates like breads and dessert type foods. You want to avoid that. Pasteurization is another issue. Some yogurts and sauerkrauts are actually pasteurized, meaning they go through a high temperature process that's pretty quick, but it actually will kill the majority of microorganisms in the product, because that's what the intention is. So you're actually killing off most or all of the goodness of the probiotics in those products. And if you're eating milk yogurt products that aren't organic, they'll also potentially have antibiotics, and again, that's not something you're going to want to be feeding your microbiome. And dairy is also an issue for a lot of people, even if they don't know it, but dairy is very inflammatory to the gut, and you may not realize you have a sensitivity to it, but it's actually something I'm sensitive to. And it's also something you're going to want to avoid if you're having any kind of C. difficile or overgrowths or inflammation issues, especially with your gut. So sauerkraut and yogurt can be good additions, but you'll want to look for yogurt that's not sweetened, and there are non-dairy yogurt options as well. And sauerkraut also, if you're lucky enough to have a live version you can buy at your store, those are great. You can also get into making fermented foods, and those are great ways to get probiotics into your system. But just again, be mindful of dairy, and that's an issue for yogurt. All right. Let's talk about potency. Now, this is basically the numbers of bacteria that you're taking in each capsule, as an example, and it's usually listed on the label as CFU per supplement, like per capsule. In 2 capsules, it may have 10 billion CFU. And that amount on the label doesn't account for die-off that happens while it's sitting at the manufacturer or wherever you bought it, or perhaps it's a refrigerated probiotic that didn't get shipped refrigerated to you and a lot of the bacteria died off in transit. So if you're taking a lot less than what's listed on the label, that's not going to be as helpful by the time it arrives where you want it. These higher potency values of maybe 10 or 20 billion CFU per capsule, they're meaningless as well if they can't survive the trip through the stomach acid and arrive into your intestines in high enough numbers. And as I mentioned earlier, some of the probiotic strains are not adapted well to survive through the stomach, and you need to get them into your intestine in high enough numbers that they're going to make a clinical effective response in there. And lactobacillus and bifidobacteria can have some definite issues getting through stomach acid, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in an upcoming session here. And as I've already talked about before, if it's not a species that's actually part of your microbiome, it won't be likely very helpful to you. So getting that right species is more important than the potency value of the probiotic. All right, let's talk about prescribed probiotics from doctors. Now, most medical doctors that are conventional mainstream doctors, they're going to lack an education in the microbiome and probiotics and holistic health unless they've taken some time to dig into it. Therefore, any probiotic options they would advise on may not have the best target for you in particular. If you're wanting a probiotic recommendation from a doctor, I would look to naturopaths or functional medicine doctors who are generally going to be a lot more knowledgeable about holistic health and understanding the role of the microbiome and how probiotics tie into that. Another issue with professional probiotics that could be prescribed by doctors is many require refrigeration. And this is also, as I mentioned before, an issue. If they are kept at room temperature, they will start losing their potency or their numbers of that probiotic. And, if a probiotic requires refrigeration, how well is it going to survive the trip through your hot stomach environment and that acid? So your stomach is around 96, 98 degrees. That's pretty warm. And of course, the industry knows that that's an issue with these lactic acid, lactobacillus type probiotics of getting them through the stomach. So that's a drawback there as well. And natural doctors also will rely on the traditional reseeding approach, which is essentially what we've been talking about so far with taking the lactobacillus or bifidobacteria strains. The ones that we've talked about are predominantly originating from cows and the fermentation processes in the dairy. And basically, let's take lactobacillus and bifidobacteria and just try to put it back in there and see if we can get it to hold. And there's limitations with that way of thinking, and we're going to discuss that more in series number 4 and 5, where we're going to go more into spore-forming probiotics, and they have some significant and great differences to discuss about these guys. Well, as you know, probiotics can be expensive, so you certainly want to make sure your money's not going down the drain. So some steps to maximize your benefits of probiotics is, firstly to find a probiotic that will actually survive making it through the harsh conditions of the stomach, that highly acidic environment that's meant to be a barrier. You want those probiotics to get past that and into your intestines in high enough numbers, and that they are adapted to actually survive and colonize and basically set up home in your microbiome, that they fit nicely in there and can colonize. And you also want to pay attention to what species you're taking and not just focus on the potency. It's not just about the potency, as we've been talking about in this session. You also want to avoid sugary processed dairy yogurt and avoid dairy, especially if you're dealing with any kind of GI overgrowth or C. difficile, any kind of infection in there, because that's just going to make the inflammation in your intestines even worse. Fermented foods, if you can get live fermented foods at your grocery store, that's a wonderful way, or make your own is even better. Be sure to get your probiotics from somebody who's a trusted source, a trusted doctor, a naturopath, or a functional medicine doctor preferably, somebody who is familiar with chronic health challenges as well. And you'll probably want to be making probiotics a long-term part of your immune support, immune boosting, and healing strategy. So next session, you'll discover 5 traits about what makes a true probiotic, one that will actually survive wonderfully through the stomach and can colonize the gut. So stay tuned. And thank you for attending session 2.